Steve Harvey dropped his microphone, stopped the cameras, and what he did next made Hollywood's biggest star cry like a child. The Family Feud studio buzzed with its usual electric energy. Golden lights cascaded from the ceiling grid, illuminating the iconic blue and gold logo that had become synonymous with American family entertainment. 300 audience members filled the tiered seats, their excited chatter creating that familiar atmosphere Steve Harvey had grown to love over 15 years of hosting. But this wasn't an ordinary taping. This was Celebrity Family Feud, and sitting at the contestant podium was one of the most recognizable faces in the world, Scarlett Johansson. She wore a simple black sweater and jeans, her blonde hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. No glamour, no red carpet styling. Just Scarlett, supposedly relaxed and ready to play. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the studio. Here was a woman who had graced countless magazine covers, who commanded $20 million per film, who had been named one of the highest-paid actresses in the world multiple times. Yet she sat there looking remarkably ordinary, almost deliberately understated. The makeup artists had applied just enough to make her camera ready, but nothing that screamed movie star. It was as if she was trying to disappear into normalcy, to remember what it felt like before the world decided who she should be. Her team consisted of her close friends from her early acting days, people who knew her before the Marvel millions, before the Oscar nominations, before she became a household name. These were the friends who still called her Scar, who remembered when she worried about paying rent, who had watched her navigate the treacherous waters of Hollywood from the very beginning. The opposing team was led by another A-list actor, but all eyes were on Scarlett. She was America's sweetheart, the woman who could kick ass as Black Widow and make audiences cry in intimate dramas. The first 2 rounds had gone smoothly. Scarlett displayed her trademark wit, making the audience laugh with self-deprecating jokes about her multiple marriages and her inability to cook. Steve played along, his natural chemistry with celebrities evident as always. The cameras captured every moment, every laugh, every perfectly timed response. But something was different about Scarlett today. Those who knew her well, her longtime friends on her team, noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She was performing, yes, but there was something underneath, something fighting to break free. It was during the 3rd round that everything changed. Steve approached the podium with his characteristic swagger, microphone in hand. The question appeared on the board in bold letters: name something that makes you feel safe at night. The audience murmured with anticipation. It seemed like an easy question, the kind that usually generated predictable answers like locks on doors, or security systems, or sleeping next to someone you love. Scarlett stepped up to the podium. The studio lights reflected off the polished surface, creating patterns that danced across her face. For a moment she just stood there, staring at the question. The seconds ticked by, 5, 10, 15. The audience began to shift uncomfortably. Steve noticed first. In 15 years of hosting, he developed an instinct for when something was wrong. Scarlett's hands were trembling slightly as they gripped the podium edge. Her breathing had changed, becoming shallow and rapid. "Scarlett," Steve said gently, stepping closer. "You okay, sweetheart?" The question hung in the air. 300 people waited. Millions more would eventually watch this moment. Scarlett looked up from the podium, and for the first time since the cameras started rolling, the mask slipped completely. The studio's climate control system hummed quietly in the background, but somehow the air felt thicker, charged with an energy that even the seasoned production crew could feel. Camera operators who had filmed thousands of episodes found themselves leaning forward, instinctively understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't just another celebrity appearance. This was a moment of reckoning. "You want to know what makes me feel safe at night, Steve?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the studio's acoustics carried it to every corner. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I haven't felt safe since I was 17 years old." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the production crew behind the cameras froze. This wasn't part of any script, wasn't planned by any producer. This was raw, unfiltered truth breaking through in real time. Steve Harvey had interviewed thousands of people, from comedians to presidents to everyday families. But in that moment, looking at one of the world's most famous women admitting her deepest fear, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a human being in pain. His own childhood flashed before his eyes, moments when he had felt powerless, vulnerable, unsafe. The difference was that his trauma hadn't been documented by paparazzi, dissected by tabloids, or monetized by an industry that treated human beings like commodity. He thought about his own daughters, about what it would feel like to watch them reduced to objects in the public eye. What happened when you were 17, baby girl? Steve's voice had changed completely. Gone was the game show host, replaced by something much more fundamental. A man, a father, someone who recognized trauma when he saw it. Scarlett's eyes filled with tears. That's when it started. The objectification, the comments about my body from directors, producers, journalists, grown men rating my worth based on how I looked in a tight dress. I was just a kid, Steve. I was just a kid who wanted to act. The audience was completely still now. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure whether they should be witnessing this moment. But no one moved. No one spoke. I remember my first big movie premiere, Scarlett continued, her voice gaining strength even as tears rolled down her cheeks. I was so excited, I thought it was about my performance, about the work I'd done. But every question, every photo, every headline was about my body, about how I looked in my dress, about whether I was sexy enough for Hollywood. She paused, her hands gripping the podium tighter. I went home that night and cried in my shower for 2 hours. I was 19 years old, and I realized that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I studied my craft, I would always be judged first by how I looked. My talent would always come second to my appearance. The admission hung in the air like a weight. Several women in the audience were openly crying now, recognizing their own experiences in Scarlett's words. This wasn't just about Hollywood anymore. This was about every woman who had ever been reduced to her physical attributes, every girl who had learned that her worth was tied to how others perceived her body. Steve set his cards down on the podium. Protocol demanded that he keep the show moving, that he find a way to lighten the mood and get back to the game. But protocol be damned. This woman needed something more than entertainment right now. And it never stopped, did it? Steve said, his voice heavy with understanding. Never. Scarlett wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Every red carpet, every interview, every photo shoot. Even when I tried to talk about my craft, about the characters I was playing, somehow it always came back to my appearance. Do you know what it's like to be reduced to a collection of body parts by people who don't even know your name? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Steve Harvey, who had spent decades in entertainment, who had seen the industry from every angle, felt something crack open in his chest. This wasn't just Scarlett's story. This was the story of countless women in Hollywood, countless women everywhere. But what happened next was what made this moment legendary. Steve Harvey did something he had never done in 15 years of hosting Family Feud. He walked away from his mark, moved past the contestant podium, and positioned himself directly between Scarlett and the cameras. With his back to millions of viewers, he created a shield, a moment of privacy in the most public of spaces. "Hey," he said softly. His voice meant only for her. "Look at me." Scarlett raised her eyes to meet his. In them, Steve saw not the confident actress, not the action hero, not the sex symbol the world had created. He saw a scared 17-year-old girl who had never been allowed to grow up safely. "What you just did," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sharing your truth like that, that's the bravest thing I've seen in 30 years of television. You understand me? The bravest thing." "I'm tired, Steve," Scarlett whispered. "I'm so tired of pretending it doesn't hurt, of smiling when they ask invasive questions, of laughing when they make comments about my body like I'm not even there. I'm tired of being strong all the time." Steve nodded slowly. He understood more than she knew. The entertainment industry had its own way of breaking people, of taking their humanity and packaging it for consumption. But this moment, this raw honesty, this was something different. This was reclamation. You know what, Steve said, his voice carrying a gravity that transcended entertainment. You don't have to be strong right now. You don't have to perform. You don't have to be anything but exactly who you are in this moment. He turned slightly, addressing the audience without fully turning away from Scarlett. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a moment here, because what this woman just shared with us isn't entertainment, it's truth, and truth deserves respect. The audience began to applaud, but it wasn't the typical game show cheering. It was the kind of applause that recognizes something sacred, something real in a world often filled with pretense. It was validation, support, love from 300 strangers who suddenly understood they weren't just watching a game show anymore. But Steve wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Right there on live television, he made a call. The studio fell silent again as everyone watched this unprecedented moment unfold. "Hello, this is Steve Harvey," he said into the phone, his voice carrying across the studio speakers. "I'm on the Family Feud set right now with Scarlett Johansson, and I want to make a donation to Time's Up, the organization fighting sexual harassment in Hollywood. Yes, right now, $100,000. In Scarlett's name." The audience erupted, not in game show excitement, but in genuine emotion. People were crying, standing, applauding not for entertainment, but for justice, for recognition, for the simple act of a man using his platform to support a woman's truth. Scarlett broke down completely then. All the years of holding it together, of being professional, of protecting her image, it all crumbled away. She sobbed like the 17-year-old girl who had never been allowed to process the trauma of being objectified, sexualized, and reduced to her physical appearance by an industry that should have protected her. Steve ended the call and opened his arms. Without hesitation, Scarlett stepped into them. America watched as their beloved game show host held one of their biggest movie stars while she cried for the girl she used to be, for the safety she'd never felt, for the dignity she'd been fighting to reclaim for 25 years. "Listen to me," Steve said, his voice barely audible but somehow carrying to every corner of the studio. "You are not what they tried to make you. You are not their comments, their ratings, their objectification. You are a brilliant actress, a strong woman, and a brave human being who just changed the conversation for every young girl watching right now." The moment lasted for what felt like hours but was actually less than 5 minutes. When Scarlett finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clear. Something had shifted, not just in her but in the entire studio. The air felt different, charged with the kind of authenticity that's rare in any medium, let alone television. "Thank you," she whispered to Steve. "Thank you," he replied, "for trusting us with your truth." When the episode finally aired 3 weeks later, it broke every viewership record in Family Feud history. But more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about the treatment of women in entertainment, about the cost of objectification, about the courage it takes to speak truth to power. The clip went viral within hours, shared not by entertainment bloggers seeking clicks, but by women who saw themselves in Scarlett's story. Mothers shared it with their daughters, explaining that they were more than their appearance. Fathers shared it with their sons, teaching them about respect and dignity. Therapists used it in sessions to help clients understand trauma. Teachers showed it in classes about media literacy and the impact of objectification. The phones at Time's Up rang for days with donations inspired by Steve's gesture. Young actresses began speaking out about their own experiences. The industry, slowly but surely, began to listen. Scarlett later said in interviews that the moment changed her life, not because it was therapeutic, though it was, but because it reminded her that her voice, her truth, her humanity mattered more than any role she'd ever played. She started a scholarship fund for young actresses, providing not just financial support, but mentorship about navigating the industry with dignity and tact. Steve Harvey never spoke publicly about the exact words they exchanged off-camera that day. When interviewers asked, he'd simply say, "Some conversations are sacred. But I will say this. That woman taught me something about courage that I'll carry with me forever." The moment became known as the day Family Feud stopped being a game show. It was shared millions of times across social media platforms, not for its entertainment value but for its humanity. It proved that authenticity could break through any format, any medium, any expectation. Because sometimes the most powerful moments aren't scripted. Sometimes they're simply felt. And on that Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles, the world felt something it desperately needed. Proof that speaking truth, no matter how difficult, can change everything. Steve Harvey stopped a game show that day, but what he really did was show millions of people what it looks like when you choose humanity over entertainment, truth over performance, and a woman's dignity over everything else.
That's not television. That's transformation.